Hi, Year 12 and 13. In this video, I'm going to take you through how to create a flashcard for global systems and global governance for A-level geography. Now, it's not a very simple thing to do because the A-level specification is quite dense. A lot of the content is, incredibly complex to get your head around, but we've got to work with it and we've got to make it as simple as possible. Now, for this video, you're only going to be able to see the screen, but I will be switching out of different tabs. So if I'm ever referring to something, I'm really only going to be referring to the specification. So if you could have that next to you, that'd be great, either in paper form or online. And then I'm also going to refer to two other websites, and I'll tell you exactly what I got from them and how I got them. And it's all very, very simple, but you'll only be able to see this screen. Now you can see that I've pre-drawn my flashcard. If you want to follow along in this video, it would be useful to have your own flashcard, even if it is just one that you work on quite roughly. And then maybe you can have next to you, and then make the nice and neat one that you're gonna keep forever. So what I've gone for is a part of the specification called 3211 Globalisation. Right, and it comes right at the very start of the specification. Those of you who start with global systems and global governance will have done this as the first thing. You first of all cover dimensions of globalization, so all the flows, etc. But then you also cover the factors in globalization, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. And it says factors in globalization, the development of technologies, systems, and relationships, including financial, transport, security, communications, management, and information systems, and trade agreements. So as you can see, it is quite a mouthful, and it's not easy to sort of wrap your head around it. But what we know is that these are all distinct, obviously, because it's globalization, everything is a little bit linked, but we can take them as distinct sort of facets to make it a little bit easier for us to understand. So we're going to pick transport, but we could have quite easily picked financial systems or security systems. Okay, so far, if we look at the exam questions that have come out of AQA, we've had two 4 markers that have linked to this. One was, how is security a factor in globalization? And then the other one was, how are trade agreements a factor in globalization? And actually, there was another one from the very, very sort of original set of SAMs, sample assessment materials, which was about how do TNCs contribute to globalization, which is not technically speaking over here, but was fine to answer because everything we do know about TNCs. Okay, so just on this flashcard, I just want to take you through the key ingredients of how to sort of make a flashcard like this. Now, another thing that you might want to have open, because I will refer to it and I have it open myself, is my flashcards guide. Now, those of you who don't have a copy of it, I will link it in the description below, because I do have a Google Drive link to it. And it essentially takes you through 5 different types of flashcards. But what I've tried to do in that guide, and what I'm going to try to do in this video, is keep it quite bare bones, because people's approaches to flashcards are quite individualistic, they're quite personal and unique to people, and that's fine. If you want to use lots of colors, you can. If you want to use a highlighter, you can, or you don't need to. If you want to use diagrams, which I'm going to talk about in a second, you can, but you don't have to. It's whatever works for you. But there are some quite specific things which are key ingredients that I think all flashcards need to have. The first one is a close link to the specification, right? What's the point of doing it if it's not linked to the specification and to the content you're learning? Hence why on the top left of this flashcard, you will see a very, very clear signpost of this is where it comes from in the specification. And I'd encourage you to do this not only for the reasons that I've just mentioned, but purely from an organizational standpoint, which is them being on a pile on your desk, and you'll be able to pick them up quite quickly and sort them if they're labeled like this, right? The other thing to do is to look at the specification, and this is something that you may need help from your teachers with, but to turn what sometimes can be quite dense spec language, which really is meant for teachers only. And here I'm thinking a lot about changing places and how sometimes there can be solid paragraphs of things that you're meant to sort of break down, or rather your teachers are meant to break down when they teach it to you, which are not, I would say, not the most student friendly. So what you need to do is make your life a little bit easier by turning things into questions, or breaking things down, or summarizing them. So if we look in this flashcard, not only because I know of how this could come up in 4 markers in other types of questions, but I've made it into a question, right, which I think is a really, really useful approach. And these are the questions where if you turn something into a question and you're not exactly sure, then you can always pose it to your teacher, and your teacher can tell you, well, yes, that is the right way to go about it. No, I would do this, or no, just tweak it in this way, right? So I've gone for, how is transport a factor in globalization, which, as I've said, is basically mimicking one of the 4 markers that's come up before. Okay, so that's one of the things. And then the other thing that's quite important, which I've got on the left-hand side here of the screen, is this thing here about facts, figures, dates, and names, which I shorten to FFDN. Okay, and that really covers the AO1 element of your study at A level for geography, right? Which is your knowledge of processes, concepts, etc. And we're going to look to include at least 2 facts and figures. They may not be the ones that you've studied, they may not be your favorite ones, and I would say actually when you come down to flashcards, especially of case studies where you potentially could have upwards of 10 bits of information, that you pick the ones that stick in your mind for whatever reason, for personal reasons, because an acronym is easy for you to remember, or whatever it might be. Go for 1, 2, 3 bits of information, and we're just going to do 2 in this one that you will definitely remember in an exam setting. All right, so that's that. So let's get on to doing this flashcard. Now, you will see on the right hand side off the flashcard, I've written what globalization basically is. Right, and not only is this an easy way of thinking about it, it's also literally what it says on the specification. So if I go back up on the specification, just above the bit that we read on factors in globalization, it tells you about the dimensions of globalization. And here's what it says: flows of capital, labor, products, services, and information. That's basically what it sees as being globalization. Right, globalization is all about flows around the world. Now, if you want further confirmation of this is how AQA views globalization, you only need to look at some of the 6 markers that have come out before using a figure, and your understanding, analyze or assess the extent to which the patterns that you can see on this map are similar to flows associated with globalization. Right. So just to summarize, globalization for AQA and really just generally is all about flows. Okay, so what we want to do in this flashcard is link whatever we're going to say about transport right here to a flow. And I've gone for the flow of a little bit of a mix of the flow of capital and products, and then I've gone just for the flow of people, right, which here is written as is the flow of labor. Okay, we've completely missed out services. We haven't really, or we're not going to go on to do labor in that much detail. And to be honest with you, we're not really going to do capital and products the sort of the full detail that it deserves, but because this video is sort of limited to being under 10 minutes, that's all we can do. So if we start with the shipping container, hopefully you've all studied the process of containerization, or at least have looked at the shipping container as being a very, very important piece of transport technology when it comes to globalization and its history, etc., and how it's revolutionized world trade. So I've gone for the fact here which says seaborne containers accounted for 60% of all world seaborne trade. Now this is something that you may have covered in lesson, but really if I just show you how simple it is to utilize the internet for a tool of revision, which is something that I'm sure your teachers have encouraged you before. Obviously, with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because you need to be wary of for want of a better phrase, fake news and stats which are quite dubious in terms of their validity and reliability. But generally speaking, it is a good source of knowledge, so long as you're always sort of fact checking with your teachers, etc. Especially numbers that seem a little bit too wild to be believable. I've just typed into Google how much do shipping containers transport around the world, right? And I've gone on what is the first link, and then I've found the following fact: that seaborne containers accounted for 60% of all world seaborne trade in 2017. Okay, that's the most up-to-date fact I could find, and I'm not just left it there, because if this were a 4 marker, and generally if this were you explaining this concept to somebody at home or somebody who doesn't do A-level geography, that wouldn't be a good enough explanation, right? If they said to you, how is transport a factor in globalization, and all you do is go into Google and then regurgitate a fact, that's just not going to cut it, right? They're not going to get an understanding. They'll ask you the question again, probably, because they've not understood it, because you've actually not explained, right? You've not elaborated, you've not shown understanding at all. So then if you look here on the right hand side, what I've attempted to do, and it's not the best version of it if I'm honest, but it's a start, you would then say, well, how does this contribute to, or how is it a factor in globalization? Factor basically means how does it affect it, positively or negatively. If we think about the question on trade agreements, just to make a link to that 4 marker, the mark scheme included not only how do trade agreements positively sort of encourage globalization in terms of the flows of people and labor and products, but also there was a part of the Mark scheme which mentioned how globalization wouldn't really be happening or wouldn't be happening at such a great pace if it were not for trade agreements. So thinking about both how do trade agreements, or transport in this case, contribute to globalization, and how would the world be less globalized without transport, which, it's not just the fact that I've taken up most of the space in this flashcard already, but really it just goes to show how much could go into this flashcard. And just to reiterate one of the key principles of flashcards, and hence why I've chosen on this screen to not use all of it. I've chosen to use a limited amount, because if we did this on bigger paper, some people choose to do things in A3, A4, etc. There is no point of really calling it a flashcard or saying that's what you're going to do, because you could really just put all your knowledge onto it. And the point of a flashcard is you go for the 3 to 4 really key bits of information. And that's also on a practical side of it, because if I refer to the specification, where we're talking about the factors in globalization, you've got to do one for transport. You're going to want to do one in a second for security, communications, financial systems, etc. And you don't want to be, for what is basically 2 bits of one topic within the whole specification, be coming up with sort of 10, 15 flashcards. That's not really manageable. So what we've done there in this highlighted blue bit is to actually explain how it's a factor in globalization. Like I said, you could potentially do a better job. If I had had more space, I would have gone into a little bit more detail, but it just shows you the principle of what needs to happen here. Is that you need to make sure that you are actually answering the question and explaining that fact and figure, or explaining that point. I've not done it for the fact above, which is now the final bit that I'll talk about in this video in terms of the link to the flows of people and labor. So I've searched this up again very, very quickly on Google. 1.4 billion tourists moved around the world in 2018, and that refers to the flow of people, but also culture, because culture is very, very important to globalization. It's a very, very important facet, an important dimension of it. So let's just summarize what I've gone through in this video. Before I do that, just to tell you why there's a diagram in the middle. Anyone who's ever been taught by me will know that I'm absolutely terrible at drawing any sort of diagram at all. So I didn't want to ruin your experience of watching this video by my attempt at what would have been a pathetic attempt at drawing an airplane. So I've just gone and done that. I think diagrams are quite useful. A lot of you may not think they are so, but I think one diagram, something that's going to help you remember factor figure, something that's going to jog your memory, I think are quite useful. I don't think overdoing it is the way to go, but if you find it useful, perhaps to do something like, drawing a stick figure here to represent the tourists in a better way, actually drawing a shipping container like so. See, I told you I'm absolutely terrible. That is meant to be a 3D version of a shipping container, but it's quite clearly not. It looks a little bit like a block of cheese. That you can actually use these to your advantage. They may jog your memory, and they do make it look a little bit, if we're honest, a little bit less scary to look at, because there is something there other than text, right? So just to go through the key ingredients again, right? So what we want to be doing is, first of all, starting from the spec. And that's what we've done over here. A very, very clear link to the spec. Then we want to summarize what we're looking at and turn it into a question. And that's what we've done right here. Then you want to go ahead and include at least 1, if not 2, facts, figures, dates, or names, which is this acronym right here, and which we've done right there and right there too. Okay. And finally, you want to limit the amount of information that's on here. So we're talking 3, at most 4 bits of information, and making sure that this bit over here, which I'm going to highlight again in a different color to highlight its importance, we are really explaining why that's the case. Okay, flashcards are meant to be for us, for yourselves as students, for you to use, but they should be something that you could hand to a member of your family and have them test you and help you out. Okay, flashcards are meant to be not to really reduce all learning and things like that to a bit of paper. They're meant to be something where you can confidently have made this flashcard and then say, look, everything I know about transport in relation to globalization is on here. Perhaps you need to use both sides if you want to, but that should really be it. Obviously, it then means that for this bit of information. For example, you've got a lot more to say, and that's fine. You would use this as a springboard, or for this one, you would use this as a springboard to something else that you want to say. But at least that the flashcard is the starting point. So hopefully that's been useful. I hope to continue this series where I'll look at different types of flashcards and perhaps even look at this question again and show you a different way of doing this one. Because like I said, while I've named, the key ingredients or flashcards, remember they are quite personal to you. You may not like the look of this one at all, but at least if you follow the key ingredients, then that should lead you to have a good set of flashcards, which will hopefully lead to you to succeed in your exams. So hopefully you found that useful, and I'll see you in the next video.